Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate you all taking time out of your diaries to come and listen to a big session on measurement. It's a real pleasure for me to be in Singapore. I've never been here before, and I've been here now for just over a day and a bit, and what a great place it is. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for that introduction, Andrew. I've never had such a glowing introduction at an event before. I'm going to talk to you. What I wanted to do was bring a global perspective on what is happening in the world in terms of best practice for PR measurement. I think that there's a real risk that the industry is splitting into a two-speed industry for communications evaluation. You've got the developed markets doing very sophisticated stuff, and some of the emerging markets still lagging behind, doing some of the more basic metrics and not paying the same attention to measurement as in the rest of the world. And as the world globalizes more, I think one of the key messages for today is that I would like everybody here to get on the front foot so that as your organizations start to really globalize their measurement, you're not caught out producing metrics that the rest of the world have moved away from. Andrew mentioned about my career. I started working in PR. I'm an ex-PR professional, like you guys, both in-house and PR agencies. And my career started in the end of the 1980s. And we've all been working through an era of unprecedented change. So I'm going to look a little bit at the change that we've had, how it's affected the media, the PR industry, and how it needs to affect the measurement industry as well. And what I'm going to do is give you some practical tips and ways that you can all go back to your office and improve your measurement right from today, which are free and free useful resources for you to use. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, the unprecedented change that we've been going through. This is Professor Emily Bell, very famous professor of media studies. And she says that the media has changed more in the last 5 years than in the previous 500. And she's talking about all the time back to the advent of the printing press. And I think this is absolutely true. When I started out in PR, those of you of a similar age, like Mr. Webster back there, will all remember it was all about printed newspapers. And when I was a junior at a PR agency, my job was to receive the clips that came in the post, and I used to shake out this envelope, and all this sort of confetti came out of newspaper cuttings, and it was my job to stick them onto a piece of paper, put our company logo on them, photocopy them, and send them off to our client. And one of my big tricks that I was taught in those days was to photocopy the clips at 108% enlargement factor. And the reason for that was that it created a bigger thud factor for the client, but the client wouldn't notice that we'd increased the size of the clip. But these were halcyon, happy days. Those of us who remember the printed media. Wasn't it great how all the world's news fitted exactly in the pages of a single newspaper? And of course, those days are long gone now. We all know that the printed media model is stressed and broken, and most media has gone rushing in line in search of viewers and advertising and readership. And they've come in and they're doing these type of things, these what we call the sidebars of shame. And they're all designed to grab our attention and make us look at the content. Recent research shows that in Britain, 76% of people think that they're better informed because there's so much content now than they've ever been before. And if you think about it, if you need to know anything, you can just Google it and there's the answer. There's so much media and information out there. But actually, I think if you look at some results of things like elections, you might say that we're less informed and perhaps being more polarized and more forced down filter bubbles and actually becoming more ignorant and not better informed. And when you couple this type of sidebar of shame with the fact that only 4 in 10 people read beyond the headline and the image of this digital media, you might understand why perhaps our opinions are becoming more extreme and we're actually becoming less informed rather than better. And as PR professionals, I'd say to you, if only 4 in 10 people are reading beyond a headline and an image, what does that say about the content that we're managing to place? This is from Kleiner Perkins's internet research, which gets published every year. This one's about to be published imminently, so do look out for. There's a lady called Mary Meeker who produces this incredibly authoritative report on internet use. And what we're seeing here is how we're using this time spent per adult per day interacting with digital media. And you can see from 2008 to 2017, when the latest research was, you can see those hours are going up and up and up. Now, on the one hand, you'd think that's a good thing because people are spending more time with digital media. But of course, our attention span doesn't scale. So we only have 24 hours in the day. If we're spending all this time, are we actually really reading this content and really drilling into it? And of course, as communications professionals, we're causing part of this problem. Our job now is to compete for attention and relevance. The whole way that we do PR is changing. So media relations, you've probably heard lots of people saying media relations is dying. The press release is dead. We're looking for influencers. If only I could find the critical influencer that would help propel my content and help it to go viral. So the work that we're doing is changing. And Andrew mentioned the GCS, the UK Government Communications. They won't recruit PR professionals any longer who just have media relations as a basic skill. You have to be able to show that you can operate across this, which is called the PESO model, which is PR professionals need to have skills, not just in the earned media section, but across paid, shared, and owned as well. And if you don't have those skills, then you're not going to be working in the PR departments of the future according to GCS. So the media's changed, PR has changed, and my question today is that measurement needs to change, and in many ways, measurement hasn't. So this is the measurement of the old, if you like. This is how it was. Remember I talked about the 108% of the clips. So it's that sort of thud factor of being able to chuck clips down on a client's table and saying, look what we've done, look at this, the result of our activity here. And they're measured in column centimetres or column inches, the dreaded advertising value equivalent, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, and what we call basic content analysis. So it's looking at the clip and it's trying to pull some information out of the clip alone. And it's very much based on quantitative metrics. So that means just counting stuff that can be counted from the clip. And there was very little link to what we call outtakes and outcomes, which is, well, what's actually happened as a result of this content. So this is how the measurement industry has been for effectively 20 years. And here is a slide from a new business presentation of my original business back in the 1990s, which set out what we would do and the prices. There's a bonus point if anyone can recognize this logo that we were pitching. Does anyone recognize that? It was one of the world's biggest companies at the time. Anyone recognize that logo? It's America Online. You remember them? Because what's happened to them? But this is from there. And what you can see, or maybe can't, depending on the screen, but these are basic output metrics. So how many journalists, what volume of clips were there? There are all these quantitative metrics. And I think the interesting thing as well, certainly in the Western market, is the pricing. So the pricing has gone up a lot from here, and then in more recent years, it's basically come back down to about these points. So what we're seeing is that a lot of measurement services are starting to get commoditized as people look at new techniques and new technologies. And you're probably thinking, well, hold on, measurement has changed a lot because there's all this kind of stuff. So these social media listening posts and command centers and these type of things. And real-time portals, dashboards, fancy charts that spin around and move. There's been a huge amount of investment into this sector. There's over 200 companies producing these type of things. They're all software as a service businesses. They've all had massive, massive investment into them. A lot of them are not making any profit. They're just being funded on ongoing raising of venture capital. The challenge with any software as a service business is that by default, you build a software platform once and then you sell it many times. So if I had a software as a service business, I would build a platform and then I'd try and sell it to each of you. And of course, if I can do that, I make massive margin for myself. It's very efficient for me to do that. The problem is, from a measurement point of view, is that each and every one of you, I think the majority of you are from PR agencies, some of you are from in-house, but if you think if you're a PR agency, your different clients, they all have different objectives that they're trying to achieve. And if you're in-house, even if you've got similar organisations as competitors, and we've got some friends here from Boeing, Boeing have got Airbus as competitors, their objectives are still going to be slightly different with the focus of their PR and communications program. So you can't just force everybody's measurement into a platform like this, because what these platforms are very good at doing is counting what's easy to count. But what they're not very good at doing is measuring what matters. And this is what we really have to think about. It's very easy now to count stuff, but what we have to do is measure the stuff that matters in terms of our organisation, how we support our organisation. So I'm going to just drill into a little bit about how a lot of these metrics that these tools count are losing their meaning, and why measurement needs to move on. So first of all, if you think back to those days of the printed media 15 years ago, the universe of audience or readership stayed pretty static. Okay, so if you think of those days of printed media, the readership of each and every publication didn't really move very much. It moved a little bit each year. Basically, the audience, the target audiences that you were looking to reach through the printed media stayed very consistent. With digital media, everything has changed. So this is another slide from Kleiner Perkins, and this is showing the percentage of the world's population that are online from 2009, when it was about a quarter, to the latest data where it's about 50%. And it's estimated at the moment that 1 million new people are going online every single day at the moment. So the potential audience of readers for your content is growing exponentially. That universe, just like the universe that we inhabit, is expanding the whole time. So if you are going to measure an event or a campaign and try and benchmark how it's done this year and compare it to how it's done last year, and you look at a metric like audience reach, well, you'd expect it to go up when the audience is getting bigger. Not just the audience is getting bigger, but of course the amount of places where your content can be published and shared, etc., is also increasing. So how do we know how much bigger good looks like? Yeah? Does that make sense? That audience is getting bigger and bigger. Well, okay, so we got a few more people this year, apparently, according to our metrics. Well, what does that actually mean? So first of all, then, the audience is increasing the whole time. Secondly, let's look at some more specific things. This is the BBC News Twitter feed. Now, if you manage to get a good news story on this BBC News Twitter feed for your client or for yourself, you would think, well, that's pretty good. And if you wanted to report your success, I think what we'd probably all do is we'd all get drawn to this number, wouldn't we, which is how many followers were there. And it says 21.2 million. So we might think to ourselves, okay, I'm going to report that and I'm going to say, you know, great news, we've got a piece of content here on the BBC Breaking News Twitter feed. There were 21.2 million views. But who thinks we actually got exposed to 21.2 million people? Because the truth is, it could be more and it could be less. Just because you're a follower, some people can come onto this page and find it if it gets shared. So you could have a system which factors up. But also, of course, a load of these followers are not in, the BBC, of course, is a British asset, but a lot of its followers aren't in Britain. So, here we are, what are we, 8 hours different time zone? If it publishes something on here in the middle of the night, we may well not see it. So everybody in Singapore might not see something breaking here. So maybe we should factor that number down. Well, what we can see here is we don't know, right? We're starting to guess on this number. So then we might think, well, actually, hold on. Not all of these followers are real. Haven't people become inactive, and aren't there bots and things like that? Well, there are different tools that you can use. And this is one called status people. And when I ran the numbers through status people, it shows this. And what it says is that of these followers, inactive is about 70%, fake is about 6%, and only about a quarter, so 24%, are what it calls good. So then you might think, well, okay, we'll take the good number, quarter, and a quarter of 21, that's about 5 million. So perhaps should we report it as 5 million? But then someone else will say, well, hold on, these inactive people, they're not all people who have left Twitter. Some of these are what we call lurkers. And a lurker is still useful. These are people who are not tweeting actively, but they're still using Twitter as a research tool, and they're still reading it. So what I think, hopefully, you can see here is that confusion reigns over this number. Anybody who's giving you a number and telling you it's deadly accurate is just basically giving you an index, and it's a nearest approximation based on whatever type of algorithm they're using, but it's not a number that is actually meaningful, apart from as an index. Now, when you consider that, according to Google, 61.5% of internet traffic is not human. So if you're looking at online content, you're looking at hits to websites and hits to media, 61.5% of that content isn't human. 57% of adverts, video adverts displayed by YouTube, are displayed in a way that can't be seen by a human. They're displayed off the screen and that kind of stuff. That's according to YouTube. There are all these kind of stats that show that just counting stuff like this digitally is really losing its meaning. And at the very best, all you can do is use it as an index. You'll all be aware of all the problems that Facebook's had with the way that it counts stuff. And you'll remember that what Facebook was doing was counting a video view as 3 seconds without the sound on. Now, if we've got content with our messages in it, that's useless to us, but it's been counted as a view because, of course, they want to sell more advertising. Mark Pritchard, who is the head of global marketing for Procter & Gamble, he was so concerned about these, what we call output metrics, losing their meaning, that they commissioned some research. And Procter & Gamble's research shows that even online mainstream media, between 10 and 20% is subject to advertising fraud and bot fraud. So these are effectively server farms that are pretending to be human, replicating, hitting adverts to drive up fake impression numbers to basically charge more money. So these output metrics alone, these numbers are at the best confusing, secondly probably wrong, and thirdly can only really be used as an index. And do please remember they're not an actual number of people. If we carry on counting the stuff that's easy to count and not thinking about the stuff that matters, things like this happen. Now, can anyone tell me who this person is? This is Liam Payne, who is one of the 4 members of One Direction. He's actually very handsome, but I chose a particularly ugly picture of him. Now, he was recently declared as Britain's most influential person on Twitter. Now, who thinks he is? Anyone think he is? And perhaps, with everything that's going on in Britain at the moment, probably other people are more influential than him, right? To be fair to him, he was so surprised, he himself tweeted this. He said, I can't believe it, I've just seen it. If I'm influential, then the world's in trouble. And no one's quite sure if he actually meant to type the world's in trouble or the word's in trouble. But, he's nailed it there. what's happening is these tools that are counting stuff that's easy to count are confusing popularity with influence. Okay, influence is not a follower number. You can buy followers. I could go and buy thousands of followers for my Instagram account, for my Twitter account, for a handful of dollars. Okay, I have influenced you if I've made you think something you wouldn't otherwise have thought, or do something you wouldn't otherwise have done. Okay, so it's not popularity. Influence is making you think something you wouldn't otherwise have thought, or do something you wouldn't otherwise have done. And hold that thought, because we'll come back to that a bit later on. A metric that has haunted the measurement industry for the whole 25 years I've worked in it. And I did want to touch on them because I know that in this region they're a metric that still is being used more than it should. First of all, the first thing to say about them is there is not one piece of research anywhere, ever, that gives them any validity. Okay? They were something that was just kind of invented. The first reference anyone's been able to find was this in the Institute of Public Relations Journal in 1949. And even back then, they were called a grave mistake that's done more to undermine PR than any other. And this criticism of them carries on. In 2009, the Barcelona Principles were declared, when a whole variety of PR trade associations came together to talk about what best practice is. And there were 7 principles of how communications evaluation should be done better. And number 5 was all these different trade associations came together and agreed that AVEs are not the value of communication. And obviously we're here today in partnership with our friends from the PRCA, and Francis Ingham and the PRCA have said this: they measure nothing other than the vanity of those reporting them. An AVE is when you put a financial metric against your editorial coverage and you say, this is the value that I have given you, Mr. Client. It's completely bogus. And I'll explain why in a sec. Just since the Barcelona Principles, with all the campaigning, again, people like the PRCA, ECO have helped AMEC, the trade association that I chair, to campaign. When the Barcelona Principles were created, 80% of the world's measurement programs, according to research, were using AVEs. The latest data that's just come out is this is down to 13%. Now, in the Western developed markets, I can tell you this number is close to 0. And the reason that as a global level this number is still up here is because in the emerging markets it's still used far more prevalently. And this is why, you know, this is a message I really want to deliver today, is it's better for you guys to get out on the front foot and move to more credible metrics than stick doing this stuff, because when your organization looks to globalize its measurement program, I would hate your peer group to be saying to you, why are you using a metric that has no validity, has been denounced by the industry, has got no academic research, and you shouldn't be using. So to help you with that, AMEC has produced a white paper, and you can use this to share with your clients, to share with your colleagues on why you shouldn't use them. You'll find it at this link here, so www.bit.ly/say no to AVEs. And what it does is it lists 22 reasons that this is an invalid metric. Okay, there's 22 reasons. I mean, if that's not enough reasons, I don't know what is. But do go there and do use it. It's in about 4 different languages, and use it, link to it, and use it as that endorsement of why you want to move your organization and your clients away from this metric, because it is meaningless. Now, I'm going to give you a quick case study on things that can go wrong if we carry on doing the metrics of the past rather than thinking about the future. So you've got to cast your mind back to about 2010. It was the early days of the internet, you know, Facebook and Twitter had been going sort of 3 or 4 years at that time. And Pepsi was a very forward-looking company. It was doing incredibly well. You might remember that it had It was selling well, and it had forced Coke onto the back foot. Coke had rebranded, it had reformulated. This was all in response to what Pepsi was doing. And Pepsi it was the #2 brand. It was only just behind Coca-Cola in America, and it was really snapping at their heels. And Pepsi decided to really embrace social media and look at the new opportunities that it could do. So what it did in 2010 was it diverted its advertising budget. So they used to have the most premium advertising spot in America, which is the Super Bowl, and advertising in the halftime break. And so for the first time in 23 years, they gave up that slot, and that saved $20 million. And with that $20 million, they diverted it into a CSR program, which was focused on the community. So it was called the Pepsi Refresh Project. And what they did was they said, look, let's engage our community to nominate and vote good causes that need our support, our financial support. So the community responded and started nominating their children's school that needed a new roof, the hospital that needed a new scanner, whatever it might be, and then everyone who liked it voted on it, and Pepsi donated money to it. As a piece of corporate social responsibility, using the internet, using new social channels, it was great. And when they measured its success, look at these numbers. So just take a look at those numbers and compare them to the type of numbers that you would see in your own measurement reports. So they're huge, right? 2.9 billion impressions. Has anyone got anywhere close to that in one of their reports? 3.5 million likes, it's increasing, 60,000 new followers, blah, 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 blah. These are good numbers. You might look at these numbers and say, nailed it, smashed it, right? Isn't that great? The problem was that when the business metrics came in, so how was Pepsi performing, the company had been utterly crushed, okay? So what had happened was its revenue had declined by 5%, 8 times faster than ever before. It had lost $500 million in revenue. It had slipped from the #2 brand, snapping at Coke's heels, to the #3 brand behind Diet Coke, which for a full-flavoured drink, particularly in those days, before everyone became so sugar-conscious, was a total disaster. To rectify the situation, Pepsi had to spend $600 million on above the line to try and shore up their brand. They had to fire 8,700 people to help recover from the financial situation that they were in. And included in that was their marketing director, who was called Massimo D'Amore, and so he got fired too. It was his idea. Now let's just look at these metrics that they reported, and let's think about that. These are those big numbers, what we sometimes call vanity metrics, the easy to count stuff. And when I talk about we've got to move on from the stuff that's easy to count and move to measuring what actually matters, let this be your reminder that I don't want what happened to Massimo D'Amore to happen to your PR agency or to your role in-house if you carry on only counting the easy-to-count output metrics. So that's the warning. That's why it matters. What are we going to do? Well, the good news is that even though everything somehow seems to have got more complicated, I'm a believer in that the more things change, actually the more they stay the same. And this is another slide I used to, my new starters at my first measurement business in the 90s, I used to give them a bit of an induction into PR. And this is how I boiled what PR and communications was really all about, down just to these words. It's about getting the right message to the right audience at the right time, and critically this, to achieve an objective. Okay? Nothing has changed from that. Our channels have changed, the audience, the way we can reach our audience has changed, but this is basically still what we're trying to do. We're trying to get our organization's point of view, position, message, whatever you might want to call it, to the right people, critical, and then particularly critical here, to do something that our organization is looking for us to achieve. So we've talked about outputs, outtakes, and outcomes. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about it. So those content analysis metrics, those big numbers that are easy to count, are all what we call output metrics. So outputs are when you do your PR work, for want of calling it something else, when you do your work, your activity, you generate outputs. Outputs will be, you know, in the old days it was printed newspaper cuttings, now it's your digital feeds, it's the social media stuff. It's everything that sort of effectively gets returned to you from your activity. If you just focus here, though, it doesn't tell us too much, because what matters is these two things, outtakes and outcomes. So an easy way of thinking about them. Outtakes are, having seen the content that's being generated or created, what do we now think? So this lady's having an aha moment. She's seen the content and she's now thinking about it. So that's step one in the process. And then outcomes are, having seen the content, having thought about it, the outcomes are, what have they now done? Okay? So outputs, outtakes, outcomes. A nice simple way to think about it. And the problem in that Pepsi case study is that all of Pepsi's metrics were over here. They're counting the outputs and not looking at the outtakes and outcomes. And the outtakes and outcomes are the only things that your boss and your clients care about. Let me just guarantee you that. Let me absolutely guarantee you about that. If you are not showing your boss or your client how you are helping them support their business in terms of changing minds or changing activity, selling more stuff, changing reputation, whatever it might be, your organization doesn't care. It doesn't care how many press releases you send out. It doesn't care how many tweets are generated. It doesn't care how many Facebook likes there are, because it doesn't matter. They only care about how you're supporting their organization in terms of changing minds, driving outcomes. So, thinking about how can PR professionals, communications professionals, prove and show value. There's a great book, it's free to download online. It's called Consult This, 62 Tips for Consulting Success. So if you Google that, you'll find it. But I thought this was just a nice little table that was in there about how do you prove value as a consultant. And it's absolutely true for PR professionals. What the sort of stuff we need to be talking to our clients and our bosses about are this. We've helped them increase this column, these things. We've helped them reduce the second column. We've helped them improve the third column, or we've helped them to create the fourth column. That's what proving value is. It's not an advertising value equivalent metric. Okay, so think about that and think about, well, how does our service work? And then how do we do it? If we're going to do that with our clients or in-house, if I'm going to reset our measurement program, how do we think about that? Well, we do it like this. We start at the top of this triangle. So the first thing we have to think about is the organization that we work for. What does it exist to do? What are its objectives? What are its goals? Once we understand that, then we map our communications and our PR goals against that. All our PR and communications work should be in support of our organization's activity. And so once we made sure that our PR goals and objectives support our organizational ones, then only then can we do our strategy, and only then can we do our tactics. And I remember someone once saying to me, you know, the difference between strategy and tactics is strategy is everything that happens above your shoulders. It's everything that, you know, your plan that's going on inside your head. And tactics is everything beneath your shoulders. It's everything that you do. And I think that's a really nice way, if you're like me and you struggle with these things, to think about that. So organizational goals and objectives, map our PR goals and objectives, map our PR strategy, map our PR tactics. Now, this is what a lot of organizations have always done, but somehow with the advent of digital media, everything's sort of changed and we've all kind of lost the plot. And it's only, by the way, when we've done all of that, that we can then work out the appropriate way of measuring this stuff, okay, whether it's tools or services or whatever. But with this digital media, everyone seems to have lost the plot. And the number one problem, and you know, I'm lucky that I go all over the place around the world meeting people and talking at events, is that people come charging in down here with social media. And I think this is driven by these software as a service businesses with all their private equity money behind them. They've all invested in salesmen. And so these salespeople are phoning you up the whole time. They're making massive promises. And they're telling you, buy our tool, it's fantastic. And they lock you into some great big contract. The tool looks great. It's got charts that move in real time. It's got dashboards that look pretty. And you buy the tool. And the mistake that's being made is you're not thinking to yourself, does this tool help me measure against my objectives? Because it may well be you don't need a tool. You might well not need a tool. You need to go through this process, work out what it is. Don't start here, start there. It might well be that you do need a tool, but that might be just a part of the solution that you need. Okay, so don't make that mistake. Now, I promised you some resources to help you to do this. So AMEC, the trade association, came together. We brought a number of leading academics, measurement companies, PR agencies, in-house PR professionals together to say, how can we help the industry globally to work out all the challenges in terms of measuring, moving from the left, you remember the outputs where I said the Pepsi stuff was, and where probably most of our measurement sitting in those output metrics, across to the outtakes and outcomes. How can we help the industry do that while also thinking about measuring across paid, earned, shared and owned with all these different channels that exist now? It all seems so complicated. So we created this thing called the Integrated Evaluation Framework. It's available, you can see lots of flags up there. It's available now, I think, in 22 different languages. It's a resource center. And it's also an interactive tool that supports you. It works for organizations of every size, whether you're a Boeing or whether you're a tiny charity. It works for organizations of every size. And you'll find it at this URL here. It's amecorg.com/AMEC framework. And I'm going to show you a few screen grabs. Rather than trying to hope that internet works, I've just taken a few screen grabs just to show you the concept of how it works. And I'll tweet these slides out, by the way, after the event. So this is how it starts in terms of the actual tool itself. It's got 7 color-coded tiles, if you like. And very obviously, you start at number 1 and you work your way across to number 7. It's a resource to help educate you. It's not a resource that counts stuff for you. Okay, let's just be clear about that. So you click on number 1, and it opens up with a whole section about your organization. And it asks you to think about what it is that your organization is trying to achieve. And you'll notice on each of these sections this little I, and what that I does is it prompts you. So if you're thinking, well, I'm a bit stuck, you can click on the I, and another bit of information opens up which tells you the type of things that you need to be thinking about. And at each step from 1 to 7 as you go across, and you can see up there, by the way, you see it says click here, there's even further information as well. At each step it supports you by giving you this information. Now, what I would recommend that you do, if you're a PR agency, is you sit down with this tool with your client when you get appointed by your client, or at the beginning of the year when you're setting objectives and you're talking about what success looks like. Sit down with your client at the beginning of the year and you say, okay, what are the organizational objectives, what are my comms objectives, and what's success going to look like? So we do that, we go across all of these sections, and we get to here, because we're not saying, what I'm certainly not saying is we have to throw output metrics away. Output metrics remain the digital breadcrumbs that lead to the outtakes and the outcomes. But we start discussing with our client, well, what does success look like? And we can plot all this stuff into the framework. And then what I'd suggest that you do, and by the way, if you do that, you have a much better conversation with your client than if you ignore measurement until the end of the program and you suddenly get some numbers pumped back at you from a measurement vendor. And you're immediately on the back foot, in cricket terminology, trying to explain what may or may not have happened. If you have the conversation with your client or your boss up front, you are in a much stronger position to talk about what's realistic, what's achievable. You've all heard of SMART objectives: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. That's what any objective should be. Any target should be all of those things. Anyway, so then you get your results, you feed it in, and it produces you a measurement plan on one page. And it does it automatically for you that you can then work against. And this is one that's been prettied up that my business did for its company, its client Skoda. And you can see the structure that that this is done. This is all based exactly on that framework. That framework is now being taught at universities. It's in use by over 2,000 organizations around the world. At the AMEC summit in Prague 2 weeks ago, massive organizations were presenting about how they've shaped it and tailored it to work for their organization. It's a process, it's an educational tool that will support you to go through building a credible and effective measurement program for yourself. So this case study, because I know everyone loves a case study, is available for download at that URL there. So if you go to bit.ly/AMEC Platinum, this one won a Platinum Award. You'll be able to see exactly how it was done. Okay, so that's the framework. That's the first one of these 2 free resources and tools that I want to tell you about. One of the things, though, that people then have said to us is, well, hold on, that's all very well, but how do I know if my measurement program's any good compared to my competitors? What does good look like from a measurement program? And if I'm not as good as my competitors, what are the specifics that I need to do to make it better? And so that led my colleagues and me at AMEC to think about things. And we thought, you know what, life's a great journey, isn't it? From the moment we're born to the moment we die, we go on this journey. And this all along our journey, we're measured and we're tested. And we're also very critical of ourselves as humans. And we are very comparative in the way that we think about how we're doing. You know, how am I doing against my friends from university? Who's got a better career? Who's got a nicer house? Who goes on better holidays? You know, all these type of things. And actually, we are measured as human beings the whole way of our journey. Now, I'm a late dad, but I'm a very proud father. And any excuse to get my son, here he is. This is my little boy Thomas on holiday a couple of years ago. And this is Thomas preparing for his, he doesn't know it at the moment, but he's preparing for his lifetime's journey of being measured. And to show you what I mean, those of you who may have had a baby in the UK will recognise this book. It's called The Little Red Book that all parents are given. And as first-time parents, you know, you're the Keenies, right? You want to do everything. And it measures everything, so all this kind of stuff. When does your child sit with support? When does he first crawl, stand, walk, smile, gaga, say mama, you know, blah, 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 blah. And also for vertically challenged men like me and beer belly challenged men like me, I want my son to be tall. And you get this in there. What this is measuring is, well, there's 2. This one's weight, but you also have height and the amount of weeks. And you can see here my wife plotting Thomas's size. And it's measuring it in this comparative way against the norm, if you like. And you can see when he started out, he was basically a bit underweight. And now he's a bit heavier than normal. And if I showed you the height one, he started out pretty short, and I'm happy to say he's going to be taller than me by about the time he's 14. So that's a good thing. But this is all this sort of comparative measurement. And it goes on throughout our whole life. So he's going to school in September, so of course, guess what? We want to get him into the best school that we can. Once he goes to school, he's got to get the best grades, he's going to be measured there, he's got to pass his exams, he's got to go to university, we want him to go to the best university, we want him to get a good degree. Why do we want him to get a good degree? Because we want him to get a good job. Why do we want him to get a good job? Because we want him to earn lots of money. And by the way, he's probably going to have some nice activities. Those of you who go running and cycling and that kind of stuff know these type of apps where you don't just measure against yourself, you can measure against your groups. And then, you know, you buy a house and you get credit scored and mortgage scored. You know, this whole measurement stuff just goes on and on and on. So what we thought was, this is all about comparative. This is what's needed in the evaluation industry, because everyone has the same question. Doesn't matter what organization you are, is what does good look like? Not just from my own measurement of my own work, but how it compares to everybody else. Am I best in class? And that's what this is all about. So AMEC created this thing called the Measurement Maturity Mapper. And you'll find it at this URL here, amecall.com/M3. Again, it's a free tool, free resource, completely free to use. And it does two things for you effectively. It tells you how your measurement program that you are using at the moment measures up to best practice, how it measures against your peer group as well, and then most importantly, it gives you practical advice on, okay, this is what you're doing, but if you want to do better, this is what you now need to do. So this is, don't worry, this isn't it, so please don't take a picture of it. This was just some early workings on it, but this was the thought process behind it. Was we want to show people on their journey. You know, the first thing I showed was a baby to an old man, but here on measurement, we're going from basic to standard to advanced to best in class. And the three dimensions we want to work it against are how good we are at planning, how good we are at reporting, and how good we are at linking that to our organizational impact. Now, planning is a critical component that goes hand in hand with measurement, and I think we forget this too frequently. I'm an ex-PR professional. I really understand it and get it, but I think one of the biggest problems with PR and communications is we're all so busy, we just get on the hamster wheel of activity and we just start doing stuff. And what's critical is that we actually take a step back to do the planning, to think about why are we doing stuff? How are we going to link this stuff to our organizational objectives? How those communications objectives are going to map to it. So planning is a critically important part, and that's the point I was saying about using the framework as a planning tool first. Sit down with your boss, sit down with your client, use it as a planning tool, define what success looks like. So planning has to link to measurement. Measurement cannot remain only a thing that you think about at the end of a campaign. I remember once a PR firm phoning me up years ago, about 10 years ago. I was the last one in the office, and they said, oh great, you know, please get hold of you. I've got 500 clips, I'd like a measurement report, I need it next week. Can I just send them over to you and you'll measure it? And I said, yes, of course, you know, that'd be no problem at all. And they were like, great, and they just wanted to put the phone down. And I said, well, look, hold on, before you go, I need to take a brief. What were you trying to do? What were you trying to achieve? What were your messages? What? And this person said to me, well, I thought you were going to tell me that. And no, it's not the measurement, that you can't measure in a vacuum. You have to measure against a plan. So you have to link your planning to your measurement. Okay, so how does it work? Well, it goes in these steps here. The first thing it does is you answer a questionnaire, a diagnostic questionnaire. There's about 50 questions, takes about 10 minutes to complete. We recommend you sit down with your teams or with your client if you're a PR agency, or if you're an in-house person, then sit down with your colleagues in your in-house team and bring your PR agency in as well to do it with you. And it asks about what you're currently doing. What it will then do is it generates a relative score, and it will benchmark you against everybody and then against different sections as well, the different components, different peer groups, so by region or by trade association or by vertical sector. by agencies or in-house, that type of stuff. And it gives you this information on an online portal. So, beautifully designed, it looks like this. You can log into it, you create your own questionnaires, it's all secure, so whatever you input can't be seen by anybody else. And also that's important, that although it's comparative, your data remains secure. Okay? So nobody can see the specifics of the answers that you give. You tell it what type of organization you are, and then you get these questions. I say there's about 50 of them. You run through them with your team, and it produces a beautiful interactive chart like this. And in case you can't see it, these 4 peaks are reporting, planning, impact, and then total. And in this example, we are the coloured lines, and the grey bar on each peak is the average. So what we can see is that the quality of our reporting is a little bit better than the average here. The planning, again, we're a little bit better at planning than the average, but actually linking to organisational impact, we're not doing so well. And then it gives you an overall score, and we're a little bit behind the curve on the overall score as well. So if it just gave you that information, that would be not that helpful. So what it then does is it produces you a report like this. So what it's saying is the top boxes here are what you're doing well across each of those dimensions, and the bottom boxes are what do you need to do better. So these are the practical tips that if you want to improve your measurement program, that you should be thinking about doing. So this is a summary then of the measurement maturity mapper. That is what it is. And so at this point I'm going to wrap up, and I think if I just reflect on what we've talked about, we are still operating in an era of unprecedented change. Okay, that's not an easy thing to do. We're all under more pressure than we've ever been under ever before. The media's changed, PR has changed. It looks like measurement's changed because we've got all these tools that we never had before. But they're still mainly counting stuff that's the stuff that we always used to count. And we need to move on from that. We need to these vanity metrics, these big impression numbers and total counts in a universe that's ever expanding, are losing their relevance and their meaning. They're nothing better than an index. And anyway, your client doesn't care. Your boss doesn't care. Your boss only cares about you supporting the organizational objectives. Have you helped change minds, the outtakes? Have you helped change activity, the outcomes? So we have to measure now. We need to keep those output metrics, but we need to work with experts who can help you measure the stuff that matters, that link from the outputs, the outtakes to the outcomes. We've got the framework, it's available. It's a free resource at amecorg.com/AMEC framework to guide you through that process. That's all it is. It's a process that you should follow. It needs time. You need to sit down and think about it. There are no easy, free answers in this space. Don't let anyone tell you there is a free, easy number or just a single number that measures your performance, because there isn't. Okay, and then once we've started to measure and we're getting more mature in our measurement process, if we really want to know about how we're doing from a measurement point of view, then there's this other tool that's available, the Measurement Maturity Mapper, that allows us to self-diagnose how we're doing and gives us all these tips on how we can do better. Because you know what, in life, this is me in 1970, and this is my far better looking, far nicer little boy, Thomas. Everything in life, we don't want to just do the same. We want to be better. And that's my challenge to all of you. So on that note, I'll thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I hope it's been useful.